Hi, friends, and welcome to another RobCast. This is episode 89, and it's an interview with Krista Tippett, and we're going to get right to it. But first, just a couple of things. My next Largo show is May 17th. If you're in the Los Angeles area, would love to see you at Largo. If you want to hear some of the past shows, there's a Live at Largo circle on my site where you can listen to those shows, including the shows I've done with my beloved friend Pete Holmes. And then the How to Be Here tour rolls on. I had a new book come out a little over a month ago, 6 weeks, 7 weeks ago, called How to Be Here. And we do these all-day experiences called the How to Be Here experience. We're essentially building like a pop-up living room where we get, I think in Durham, it was an old brewery. I'm not quite sure what that was. This fantastic space, and we do dance halls and art galleries and clubs, and we just put the chairs in a big, giant, round, square circle with me in the middle walking around, and we do a day together. And one of the greatest joys for me is just meeting you people because you're fascinating. And so next we're going to be in Minneapolis. So all of you for the past couple years have been like, when are you coming to Minneapolis? I'm coming to Minneapolis in May. There's still a couple of seats left for the How to Be Here experience in Minneapolis. There's book signing Friday night and then all-day experience on Saturday. And then we're going to Portland and then Oklahoma City Friday night, How to Be Here experience in Tulsa, and then Brooklyn at the end of June. So still a couple of tickets for all of those, and would love to see you there. And then July, we're taking the tour to Australia. So there's this magnificent man named Jono in Australia who started the Wake Up Project. And I'll be taking the How to Be Here experience to the Wake Up Project. And we're doing events in Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And would love to see you there, all of you Australia folks. And then we're going to England in August and doing the How to Be Here experience in London. So all the info for that, and then the fall leg dates will be up soon. All that info is at robbell.com. Because I love coming to where you are. It's just brings me so much joy. And then, I do these 2-day events where we talk about all the stuff that we all want to talk about. But we take 2 days, and we're doing one in September about communication and the creative process, and how do you take something that's inside of you and give it expression, give it language, give it form. And then doing one on spiritual leadership, and then one on business. So healthcare, law, entrepreneurs, education, moms, whatever it is that you do all day, how do you find meaning and depth and significance in your work? So these are all the sort of the questions and the things that I talk about and we deal with together. And so the 2-day events, 3 new ones are now up on my site. This fall, come hang out with me at the Improv. Because once again, we're all in this together, and we're all figuring it out. And just how great is this? And how great is this that on RobCast episode 89, I get to sit down and talk to Krista Tippett. And oh my word, I've admired this woman for so long, and here she is. Hi, friends, and welcome to another RobCast. And today, oh my word, I get to interview Krista Tippett. Hi, Krista Tippett.
Hello, Rob Bell.
This edition of the
here.
RobCast is entitled
I'm not hearing anything in my headphones.
I know you can't really hear.
Oh, that's
much
okay.
in
All right,
headphones.
all right.
On Being in the Back House is what this is called.
Okay. All right.
I've been such a fan for so many years, so has Kristen. And so to talk to you is just fantastic. And I'm assuming that all my listeners already would be like, yes, of course. But this new book, which we're going to have to talk about, it's so crazy good.
Thank you.
And you're wrapping up a book tour. Chris has a new book. It's called Becoming Wise, An Inquiry into the Mystery and Art of Living. I mean, I'm a fan of titles alone. The spiritual gift of titling to me is the one I most acknowledge. This is It's so good. How long did it take to write it?
It took a long time to write it. It took about, I worked on it for about 7 years. Now, there were stretches in there where I wasn't getting anything done,
Yeah.
right? But the thing about having, I mean, you've written so many more books. I was having to do it alongside
Regular
a
life.
very, very full-time job.
Yeah.
But a book hangs over you. So even when there was a year when I hardly worked on it, it was present, and
It's still like in your brain and heart.
it's in your brain, yeah. And it was really, I had to make a few steps to find the voice for the book, to write it. I had to get out of the mode I'm usually in as a radio interviewer. I had to put myself into the story, and I had more than one terrible draft where I hadn't figured out how to do that yet. It's very painful. Writing is hard, hard, hard.
Really?
I don't know if you don't.
Yes.
It's
Agony.
right.
Agony. You sit all alone.
Oh,
There's no one going, good job, you're doing great, that's awesome. It's just
yeah.
quiet, crickets.
Yeah.
And then at some point, you don't know what you have. You don't know what you have.
Yes.
And then it sort of goes out into the world.
Yeah.
And if you do give it to a friend because you want them some feedback, they then would have to read it. So the best case scenario is 6 hours from now if they had no life.
Right. Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
just, okay, so what I found fascinating is this is throughout the book, we get your story, like woven in. You grew up Southern Baptist in Oklahoma. Does everybody know this?
Did
prior
you
to
not know
book?
this?
Pardon?
Did you not know that about me?
I did not know this. Does everybody else know this and I didn't know that?
I mean, I mentioned my Southern Baptist preacher grandfather
Okay.
quite a lot across
Okay.
the years.
So everybody but me apparently would already know this. Then you go to Brown, which is like a different world.
Different planet.
And then you go to Germany, which is like a third planet.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And each, so your grandfather is a Baptist minister.
Hellfire and brimstone.
So it's everybody's going to go to hell but us. It's hymns.
Everybody, including Methodists.
Oh.
Okay. Heaven is small.
And did you buy it? You obviously have great love for your grandfather.
I did. I mean, it was an immersive world, and it was a complete cohesive world. Church wasn't just this place. I mean, we went to church
Right.
3 times a week, but it wasn't just a place you went 3 times a week. It was the center of social life.
Yes.
It was the people we knew, and everyone was part of that universe. And we were all kind of on the same page in terms of having the text and the teachings
Yes.
and the experiences, and for as judgmental and scary as my grandfather could be, and as much about joy-killing rules, he was loving, and he was funny, and he was lusty, and he had I sensed, I mean, I wouldn't have said it this way as a child, but I sensed that he had a big mind, but he had a second-grade education. So he'd never been taught or invited to use his mind or to apply it to the scriptures that he loved so much. So there was this
Fascinating.
fearfulness about him that I picked up without being able to make sense of it. But there were the contradictions in him. All flowed into my sense of who God might be, and at that totality, that contradictoriness about him is something I really appreciate now.
Yeah, he was like a man whose heart and mind were bigger than the system.
Yeah.
But paycheck and esteem and relationships and social life and economics and politics probably was all like a giant hairball. And for him to have like grown, expanded, challenged it the implications would have been massive.
Yeah, it was a pretty closed system, his faith, his theology. And I think he would have been scared to ask questions that not just that might might not come out the way they should, but that might not have an answer. So there's part of me that feels like I do the work I do on behalf of my grandfather. If my grandfather had lost his fear of his questions, and that I can speak with physicists and neuroscientists and evolutionary biologists,
Which he would have loved.
I think what I like to imagine is that he could have lost that fear and that he could have loved it.
Right. See, I'm so fascinated when you see somebody doing something and they're thriving in their work and you begin asking them questions, how often the seeds of where they are, you can find way, way, way back there somewhere.
And that's why I asked that spiritual background of your childhood question at the beginning of all of my interviews.
Yes.
Because however we grew up, and in my case, religion was all about answers, Christianity was all about answers, but I find that expansively understood in that spiritual background of our childhood, that early spiritual place in us, it is a place of softness and searching, and questions reside there. And often, and sometimes by a very winding route, I find that, like me, I mean, this is one of the interesting things about writing this book is that I realize that I'm one of these people too. I've made this observation about other people for years,
Yes.
but often in that place, in that childhood and in that spiritual part of our childhood, there are questions that people end up pursuing their whole lives long, either personally or professionally, in ways they couldn't have imagined, in ways they couldn't have planned.
Yeah. It's I so resonate with that because my parents would take us to church growing up, and I thought the Jesus stories were so brilliant and subversive and unexpected. And every time he's asked a question, he responds with a question. Well, how do you read it? How do you think about it?
Yes.
And whenever there's a center and somebody's been kicked to the edges by the center, he moves from the center out. And whenever there's an establishment that's decided they're in, they're out, they're clean, they're unclean, they're with God, they're not against God, he's like, actually, it doesn't work anything like that.
Yeah.
And that at this deep level, as a very young, had this sense like the gathering that happens in honor of him isn't anything like him. And like even the past couple of years, realizing how much of those first, it's almost like it gets etched on your conscience. That's not right, and someone should do something about that.
Yeah.
And then from there, you're on your way, even though you don't realize it at the time.
And even things that might seem minor to other people, but the fact that Jesus turns water into wine.
Yes.
And that one of my grandfather's biggest rules is no drinking.
Right.
Right? I mean, I
Right.
still remember this traumatic day when he came over to our house and my parents actually had a bottle of wine in the refrigerator which they'd forgotten to hide. But I do remember at some point asking him about this and saying, well, Gaggy, Jesus turned water into wine, right? And so then he would come up with this convoluted explanation.
Right. Pliny the Elder said it was 22 parts water or something, right?
No, I
It's
mean,
like
he
a
didn't
funny
even have that
explanation.
kind of theology. I think but as I say, he didn't know the answer. Oh, here's another one that was actually painful as I grew older. Southern Baptists are Southern Baptists because they wanted to keep their slaves.
Oh,
I never knew that history growing up. Only in the last decade has there been this kind of public reckoning, in the
yes.
Southern Baptist Convention. I don't know that my grandfather knew that history. And when I went away to college and came back, I'd learned the history for the first time, and I asked him about it, and he came up with an answer. He said, well, I don't even know if this is true. I've never checked this out. Jesus was born in the south of Galilee.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh,
But what was unimaginable
that's
for
so.
him.
It makes so much. No, it's so completely crazy. It's kind of awesome.
And I don't actually think he was lying, right? But what I think he every question had to have an answer that kept things neat and tidy. And actually,
yeah.
as you say, that's not in the spirit of the gospel.
Yeah.
And so there's something painful and sad to me, again, that I'm like trying to rectify with my life, seeing that my
Yeah.
grandfather had to be fearful in the same place where he found such deep meaning in his life.
Right. And the place of such great depth and love and foundation was also constricting, and it was all the same
Yeah.
Good Lord, that's so fascinating. Okay,
Yeah.
so Brown, then Germany, and I'm going to read you lines from your own book if that's okay.
Yeah, I do that to people, so
Okay, good.
I'm happy to be
Yeah,
on the other side of
this
it.
we're turning the tables on Krista Tippett. You talk about East Berlin and West Berlin, and there's so many great lines. I started underlining. I was underlining so much stuff that at some point I was like, forget it, just read it because you're going to end up just underlining the whole thing. Um, Seriously, peoples, it's that good. But you do this. There's this line about. I found myself drawn again and again, almost for sanity's sake, to the east, where so much more was at stake. So there's communist East Berlin. There's not communist West Berlin. But you're drawn to the east where so much more was at stake and life and mind felt more passionate and vital. This realization unsettled my sense of personal progress and education. It was possible to have freedom and plenty in the West and craft an empty life. It was possible to have nothing in the East and create a life of intimacy and dignity and beauty. I mean, in some ways, that summarizes all of your work to me at some level, but this was in your 20s?
It was in my 20s, and it's an ancient insight, right? It's an
Yeah.
insight behind philosophy and religion that the quality of the lives we craft is not dependent on the circumstances we're given.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're fighting for survival, that's one thing. But um, for most of us, we have a set of raw materials, but it's how we work with them that 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 defines
Yeah.
the life and the presence we have in the world. And but yeah, I was young and I was idealistic and I was thoroughly political. And at that point, I hadn't talked about religion or thought much about religion for a decade. And yet, I was seeing this spiritual, existential part of humanity and this calling that we have to create our lives, and seeing how the reality of that didn't mesh with, the way I'd been taught the world works. That you make
Yes.
a big outer life, you make a big career, you get power, a certain kind of
Right.
power.
Right. And then you're happy, which doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, and there's this fascinating line. My time in Berlin began to point me to the kinds of questions I've asked ever since. How to give voice to those raw, essential, heartbreaking, and life giving places in us so that we may know them more consciously, live what they teach us, and mine their wisdom for our life together. Let's just pause at how awesome that paragraph is.
Thank you. It makes me really happy that you like the book, and it's actually really fun to have you hear the words come out of somebody else's mouth and out of your mouth.
Yes, I'm available. I know they've asked me to do the audiobook as read by a guy in his 40s named Rob Bell. That probably wouldn't do that well, but I would enjoy it because it's also interesting to me if you think about sort of evolving consciousness. Oklahoma has a very magical, mythical. There really were two animals at a time that went on an ark. Then you go to Brown, which is then let's go the other direction,
Yeah.
which is essentially let's let the mind run wild. Then Germany has this real politics sort of, okay, how do you act in the world and what kind of world do you make? And then there's this trans-rational place where you begin to integrate it all, which sort of turns into what you then do, which is the mind fully engaged. But the most logical thing is to acknowledge these phenomena that transcend the mind.
Yes.
Not to sort of, get into your business, but this is how it sort of unfolds in the book, which is just beautiful, which I think is why so many people respond. You write this: I believe that mystery is a common human experience, like being born and falling in love and dying. A new openness to the language of mystery and the kindred virtue of wondering across boundaries of belief and non-belief, science and faith, is helping us inhabit our own truths and gifts exuberantly. I like that part. While honoring the reality of the other.
Yes.
It's I have no then you're right. I have no idea what religion will look like a century from now, but the evolution of faith will change us all. Pow! That's like the drop. Krista Tippett drops the mic.
Right. So, um, and I'm probably addressing my grandfather in that too. The thing is, I think we can have it all. I
Oh,
think we can
thank
have
you.
certainty
Thank
and
you.
conviction and integrity, and we can claim truth as best we can discern it at any given moment, and we can dedicate ourselves to living by that
Yes.
truth.
Yes.
But
I'm
at
high-fiving the universe right
Okay.
now.
Well, and you know this. This is another way of talking about what you write about. But but at the orthodox core of our traditions, it insists on the reality of mystery,
Yes.
and that there will be much that in this lifetime we can't comprehend, can't pin down. And so one of my favorite images that came to me a long time ago from my conversations was with a geneticist, Lyndon Eaves, who was also an Anglican priest. And he said that he often had to hold the scientist in him and the theologian in him at bay. But he said that he thought that there was a kinship between that the spirituality of the scientist is like the spirituality of the mystic,
Absolutely.
which is at one and the same time to delve into truth, to claim truth as best you can know it and live by it, and also to be open to everything that you do not yet, cannot yet know, and even to celebrate that, to delight in that. And so, that's what I mean. I think we can have it all. We can have robust identities, and we can celebrate the mystery, including the mystery in this century of the religious other.
Yes.
We don't have to choose between those two things. And that makes the 21st century possible.
Yes. And it creates all this. By the way, I love that you love Desjardins.
Yes.
I, oh, yeah, we could do a whole thing on that.
Spiritual evolution. Yeah.
When when I realized that the pieces that were falling into place for me, obviously you always learn that somebody else said it better 172 years ago.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Is that how it
Yeah.
works?
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm starting to actually see some big patterns here. And then somebody's like, that Johann von Varksten wrote about this 900 years ago, or Rumi has 19 poems about it. And you think,
Yeah.
oh, okay,
But
great.
that's okay. The world also needs you to put your words around it. Really.
Yes. Yes. The organization of old information creates new information. And how do you, it's interesting to me how you intuitively from the get-go in your work are moving this ridiculous sort of science versus faith. It just was never any, you were always comfortable wherever it took you.
It's an artificial fight.
Yes.
It is an artificially constructed fight. The history of both science and religion, and I mean, let's just talk about Christianity.
Yes.
I mean, Galileo and Copernicus and Kepler, and even Darwin, all of them were rooted in a Christian worldview and essentially believed that whatever they could learn about the natural world
Absolutely.
would illuminate, would expand our understanding of the intelligence and the
Yes.
creative mind behind it.
We're all on the same team.
Yeah, yeah. So actually there was no separation between science and theology. These were mutually enriching disciplines for the longest time. And then for this blip in history of the past couple of hundred years,
Right.
in places, and only in places in Christianity has there been what is perceived as an argument. But there's so many things wrong with that, and I think one of the core ways to think about it is that there's this perception, and this would probably have been my grandfather's perception, that science and religion are reaching different answers on the same questions. And in fact, they are asking different questions altogether.
Yes.
And together, they are illuminating the totality of the reality of us and the reality of the natural world in ways that we couldn't have that illumination without both of them.
We need both of them. I have this theory that like when two things are belong together, but somebody splits them. Like if you and I are really angry with each other, so we turn and walk away from each other. If we keep walking, we're gonna end up meeting each other face to face in China or something.
Yes, yes.
That when something
Yeah.
was unfairly or incorrectly divided, and like seen as a spectrum, like moving away. At some point, just give it enough time, and they'll end up in Nepal running face to face. And that you have this great thing happening in culture where people are going, these two that were sort of pitted,
Yeah.
they actually went away from each other, and now they're meeting and
And I
going,
think there's actually physics to back that up, what you just said.
oh, there always is.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's always
That's
somebody
true.
who's like,
Yeah.
corks do that normally
Yeah.
a billion times a
Right.
day in your left
Right,
hand.
right. But then, the fascinating thing for me is because 10 years ago, I just, when I started interviewing scientists and, even scientists who aren't religious, are at all, and who aren't setting out to create spiritual insight are doing that. I mean, they are revealing theologically evocative things to us.
Yes.
But what now I feel like, and this doesn't get nearly as much play as the fight, but now there's been this rapid evolution where other kinds of science, the life sciences, are actually taking the wisdom of spiritual traditions, the virtues of theology, into the laboratory and revealing how deep and true and profound they are, and actually illuminating that in ways that theology hasn't been able to describe.
Right.
You know, love
Ecosystem. Yeah.
and forgiveness and
Yes.
generosity and gratitude.
And I love the brain studies where they're like, hey, if you take time to like reflect and meditate, then the brain will actually calm down.
Oh, yeah.
And, yep.
Yeah.
Which people have been saying for several thousand years.
Yeah. Yeah. Contemplation is good for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now there's like little hints of Krista Tippett when she's not on the mic. You love to watch TV.
I do. Good TV. Although I suppose people could disagree with my choice in good TV.
Like what do you like?
Oh, well, I like a lot of things that might not seem
That's
very
exactly what I'm asking
virtuous.
for.
I love The Americans.
Yep.
I like Homeland. I loved True Blood. I loved those vampires. I love there's so much great TV now, and I'm
Isn't it
so
amazing?
fascinated with how good TV is bringing us back to not just our love of good storytelling, but our need for it.
Yes.
And also how storytelling is the way we make sense of our lives and of great moral issues, and it's not by simplifying them, and it's not by making everything rose colored. It's about like honoring the drama of the human condition
Right.
and the messiness of it.
And now with whole episode, like whole series, so like The Wire or House of Cards,
Yeah, House of Cards.
there'll be this one person rolls her eyes at the other person in episode 17, and and all is for like a tenth of a second, oh, apparently they have something with them, and then 29 episodes later,
Yes.
you find out.
Yes.
And otherwise, you're just left to like, apparently there's something going on between those two.
Yeah.
And we'll find out in 2019 what it is.
It's so great. It's
So great.
It's a rediscovery of depth.
Yes. So what's a normal week? Do you go to an office?
I do. I actually 3 years ago I took my project out of the big media company that it was part of, and so we now have an independent nonprofit production company.
Got it.
So and that's why I ended up, there were a couple of years in there that I wasn't working on the book because I was creating a new organization. And that's been, that was hard, but it's been really life-giving. I mean, to create a place where people come to work every day that is joyful,
Yes.
which was not a given in a kind of more traditional organization.
Yeah.
So I go to work and I sometimes I find people romanticize my job, which I am so grateful for what I do.
Yeah.
And I think actually part of my growth curve, it needs to be just being just that much more grateful for it. But I had to fight so hard for it for such a long time,
Oh.
and
Anybody who says must be nice, you're like, you have no clue.
yeah, well, and also I would say I don't know how much of my time, maybe 5 or 10% of my time is actually doing these beautiful conversations, and I mean those feed me. That's why I come to work every day. But I also raise all the money for the show, and I'm running this organization, and I travel. So there's like in any job in any work, there's a lot of administration, and there's a lot that is
Yes.
not in and of itself meaningful. I worry so much about how now there's this mantra of having meaningful work, right?
Right.
Well, everybody is not, especially now. I think post 2008, everybody's not going to have work that somehow or a job title that defines who they are. So I want us to rediscover this language of vocation, and to understand that vocation is not synonymous with a job title. Right? For a few of us, maybe it is, but vocation is about your human unfolding, and it's about you as a parent and a neighbor and a friend. It's about your avocations, and maybe it's about how you do the work you do, rather than whether that work on the surface looks like it's socially meaningful.
Yes. There's a romance, sexy thing about certain work, but every time I'm with somebody who there's that, like, oh wow, and you find out, which is why I always ask, what's a week like?
Yeah.
They're like, well, yeah, 13% of it is
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
and you have to love all these other pieces because of what goes into it. So literally 10% is conversations.
Probably. Yeah.
So
I
you're
mean, I
like,
was with some 20-year-olds, and they were like, they said, well, how does your day start? And I said, well, my day starts with about 2 hours of email, right?
right.
Literally, and writing things and corresponding and solving problems, and there's nothing romantic,
Right.
nothing spiritual about it.
10% of your work is a walking meditation with Thich Nhat Hanh, and 37% is Phil, the photocopier is broken again. Carol, get the TPS reports
Yeah,
in
or
here.
some equivalent of that.
This coffee sucks. It's so refreshing. By the way, we have to talk about, you have this one line, all alone, which I love. It's not a paragraph, it's just a line hanging in space about walking meditation with Thich Nhat Hanh, which I'm assuming you probably can't put what happened that much into words, but I'd love for you to try
Yeah.
why it was.
I don't know why that just reminded me of my daughter, who's 22 now. She's home last summer, and there's a person in the book, Matthew Sanford, the yoga teacher, who's paraplegic, who's a really important teacher to me on kind of reconnecting mind and body. She went to one of his classes, and he's in Minneapolis, and she came home and, okay, so well, your child is 17, but she's in her 20s, right? So I say, how was it? And she said, well, Mom, it was a true mind-body experience. So as you'll understand, I can't really describe it to you. So you just asked me,
Yes.
you asked me that question.
Right.
But what I said is sounds simple, but the experience of that's another artificial separation we created,
Yes.
mind body. I have this feeling that 50 years from now, people will look back at literature of this age, and they'll see how we talk about mind, body, spirit, and they'll kind of smile at how primitive we were.
Yes, you have this line, page 57, for those of you keeping track at home. Mind and spirit are as physical as they are mental. This happened to me when I started reading quantum physics.
Yeah.
Wait, everything's made of atoms. Atoms are made of particles. Particles are made
Yeah.
of subatomic particles, and subatomic particles are relationships of energy.
Yeah.
So this table and chest and
And
bone.
even how we're learning that so many things that we've treated as emotional or mental, like trauma, are lodged in our bodies.
There's like a pain body.
Yeah, there's a pain body. And it's so interactive, wildly interactive. But the church did this to us. I mean, and I think the church actually, the Western church, infiltrated this chin up experience to other religions as well in the
Yes.
West. And for my grandfather,
Chin up experience.
yeah, right.
So
For my
good.
grandfather, the body was an entry point of danger. Like it was just perilous.
To be
It was
feared
a
and
slippery
ignored.
slope for everything bad.
Yes.
Addiction, sex, pregnancy. And actually, in his generation, there were very good reasons. I mean, that it was before AA, it was before birth control, it's before. So that's actually something that I got some compassion about
Well,
later.
that actually hit me really, really hard.
I mean, there was an intelligence about the body in that generation that had validity in that world. and I have to
There is
honor
this
that.
rule about all these things you can't do,
Hmm.
but if you trace it back to the first arising of that rule, it was because there were real dangers.
Yes.
Like that building's really on fire, don't
Yeah.
go into it.
Yeah.
Which a couple generations later, all you have is the rule without the reason
Yeah.
why.
Or for example, I mean, I did a project before I started, when I was starting the radio show, but before I could make a living from it, for Hazelden, which is the you know, recovery and addiction, the original treatment center. And I talked to people in other countries where AA had arrived within living memory. And I had this realization that until 12 steps, until AA, addiction was a death sentence, right? It was just a path to ruin. And my grandfather growing up on that Oklahoma frontier,
Yeah.
that rule of no playing cards and just don't even take a drink. I remember asking him, like, really? I mean, I said, I get it that you shouldn't get drunk, but why not even take a drink? And he said, well, you could be setting an example for someone. And what I realized later is setting an example for somebody who really can't stop themselves, and there is no turning back. So,
Right.
but there was a reality about our physical selves in that we kind of stop heeding now. Then once we have the solutions, so we go the other direction.
Yeah.
Um,
Write the whole thing off.
Yeah, don't honor the body. You can do it all and you can fix it later. That's
Yeah.
also not intelligent.
I um I love that the book are these words: faith, hope, love, flesh. I love that flesh is the first like main chapter of the book. We are matter, kindred with ocean and tree and sky. We are flesh and blood and bone. To sink into that is a relief, a homecoming.
Mm.
Seriously, as somebody who's tried to write a few books, this is just like, I just don't even know what to say. So good. Um, the and then you have this line: we try to control this messy reality we are, tugged and torn by desires and needs and holes we fill with excess. Now we're bringing our sense of ourselves back to earth. We're tethering our yearning for wholeness to the physiology we've known about for a while. The neurons were just learning to see. Physical, emotional, and spiritual are more entangled than we guessed, more interactive in every direction, and this knowledge is a form of power. Can you talk about power in that sense?
Yeah, I feel that way about a lot of what we're learning on this frontier of our bodies and brains. Um, it, we're we are, living, breathing contradictions. We are so complicated. We're so messy, and what we're getting is a way to understand how that works and to calm ourselves down and to create conditions. So we're learning that we are hardwired for revenge, which we already knew. We're also learning that we're hardwired for forgiveness.
Yes.
But that what that science also tells us is that we have to create the conditions for forgiveness to become more likely and more possible. Or another knowledge to me that's so relevant right now, that's a form of power, is how we're learning this science of implicit bias, how we're learning that our brains, that we divide up the world into categories because we have to do that to survive, to navigate the complexity of reality. But that we implicitly, uh, we make judgments when we don't want to and we don't think we should, and we're not racist, right? But we make judgment on the basis of skin color or gender, um, uh, and so to to know that, I mean, when we see, in a lot of the terrible things that are erupting now, we see the very real world tragic
Yeah.
consequences of that. Um, to know it, is to claim it, right? I mean, and here's where you go back to the ancient intelligence of like the Psalms, right?
Yes.
Because the Psalms say that every emotion, including murderous rage, belongs in the presence of God. But it's claiming it also means that you have control over what you do with it.
Yes. if you make lists of things you wish were done to your enemies, violent things, at some point you may have less energy. I always talk about the Psalms like the, you know, do something bad to my enemy. No, you know what? Do something bad to my enemy's kids. No, dash
That's
my
right.
enemy's kids against the rocks.
Yes.
No, dash my enemy's kids' friends against the rocks.
Yeah.
And it's like these increasing gradients of
Yeah.
violence, but you realize all the energy it takes to make these lists of things you're actually feeling
Yeah.
are, you're a lot less likely to actually act on those impulses.
Yes.
And you become powerful in all sorts of other ways.
Exactly.
I was thinking in this paragraph, Mandela's in prison for what, 27 years?
Yeah.
And it's like everything is we'll get out and get revenge, or we could forgive,
Yeah.
and that there is this power that he has. There's that shot coming out of prison, walking down the street. It's so powerful, but not normal power.
Yeah.
It's like this integrated power that has transcended what would be the normal course of action.
And then that way he embodied a possibility that would have seemed almost unimaginable,
Right.
was accompanied by a process, right? And that's where, the conditions were created by people
Yes.
like Tutu and all those people who took part in the Truth and Reconciliation. A structure was created for forgiveness to become more possible.
Yes. I sometimes think, like when I think about what moves me in the work that I do, I sometimes, I'm creating space
Yeah.
where,
So that's such important work right now. Just
yeah,
that, creating spaces where something new can happen.
and I'm gonna create a space where we're going to assume that hope is the most rational response to the world.
Yeah.
I'm doing this tour right now because I had a book come out where we like a pop-up venue, so we get like a dance hall, art gallery, club, and then we do all the chairs in the round, and then I do a whole day in the middle of this, and I can move in among all the people, and sometimes I can feel in the room. The job here was to create space where love and talking about things of depth and not skimming the surface. Half of it is just creating a space where this is, of course, this is how we would interact with things.
Yeah, you and I are comrades, right?
Yes.
This is, and so people, so when I'm out now talking about the book and people, most of us are so discouraged with the way things are working, with what passes for public life now, with what passes for
Right.
discourse and
Right.
encounter. And, and people are wondering what to do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, there's a lot to talk about that we could do. There are conversations we need to be having. There are new ways we need to listen to each other and engage. And I think be in reflection and discernment and also act, but not necessarily skipping over the relationship and discernment to the action,
Yes.
which is the American way. But I think the first step is creating new spaces,
Yes.
right? Creating quiet, inviting,
Yeah.
trustworthy spaces where the language of even safety has gotten a little bit politicized, right? Safe space can also mean a place where some people are safe
Right.
and others aren't.
Right. Right.
But so, yeah, creating new conversational relational spaces where unimaginable possibilities can be realized,
Yes.
which are not rocket science, but will not happen. We can't expect to have new kinds of conversations and become vulnerable with those we disagree with, which is actually a prerequisite to something new happening. We can't ask ourselves or others to do that in most of the charged,
Right.
fraught spaces that are ready-made now.
Right. 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 There has to be a new space, and then there's an interesting, fierce protection of this is how this space is going to work, and so you're going to have to behave this way. You have this great line for most of history. Religion was a full body experience, a primary space in common life where we danced and sang and laughed and cried and ritualized the passages of our lives. Rituals are sophisticated ancient, I'm actually going to underline that again. Rituals are sophisticated ancient intelligence about the body. They're like physical corollaries to poetry. Rituals tether emotion in flesh and blood and bone and help release it. They embody memory in communal time. Krista Tippett, come on. It's so good.
Thank you so much.
We make our kids breakfast in the morning,
Yeah.
And like this morning was French toast and smoothies, and we'll put like it'll be like a fresh smoothie, but then we put like hemp protein or chia seeds or goji, and it's like how many superfoods can we put in it without them going, "Ugh, what is this?" It's like how much greatness can I see? But when people ask, I'm always like, it's a ritual. It's somehow
Yeah.
the poetry of a great breakfast
Yes, I love that.
is if we can do this, then the day we have said something to ourselves about the day.
And yes, and the whole journey of writing this book, which I started with an idea about 10 or 11 chapters, and they had these lofty poetic titles. And the process of getting honest with myself and like really understanding what I had learned from all this symphony of
Yes.
voices, it got more and more elemental, right?
Yes.
Wisdom emerges through the raw materials of life. It is as much about what you do in this minute,
Yes.
and this day, this hour, and this day, and it's about how you do breakfast. I mean,
Yes.
that is exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, on the one hand, it is a noble undertaking of a lifetime, but the architecture of that is this moment and the next moment and the next one after that.
And it's kinesthetic and tactile, and it's
Yes.
fabric, and it's
Yes.
stone, and it's all rituals tether emotion in flesh and blood and bone and help release it. They embody memory in communal time. Can you say that? They embody memory in communal time.
And that's where I'm thinking of, well, I was going to say I'm thinking of kind of collective religious life. I mean, I think that's what communion does,
Yes. Yeah.
or all these ways we mark passages of, christenings or funerals, or membership. But actually, as I think about what you just said, I mean, the family breakfast or the family dinner also embodies memory and communal time.
Absolutely. And
So,
and like the Jewish home where every table is an altar. The centrality of the whole thing is not a temple down the street or something. It's the table where we all gather.
yeah.
Like that's the center of the action. That's the mothership.
And so this language of virtue is so important to me, and rediscovering virtues as intelligence also about how we become who we want to be, not rules. But
Right.
what neuroscience is now telling us is what you practice, you become. And so you may not feel like you're the most patient or generous or hospitable or loving or compassionate person. And I think we are born with different proclivities in those directions. But these are also things you can practice.
Yes.
And hope is another one. These are choices you make, and they are ways you behave, not ways you necessarily feel you're gifted to be. But we can build up spiritual muscle memory so that these qualities do become instinctive. And that is so exciting. I mean, talk about a form of knowledge as a form of power that we possess, that our
Absolutely.
ancestors did not.
Absolutely. And like I love because it always every single time anywhere I go with the Q&A, I love saying to people, okay, this question that you've asked, you have presented a hairball. It's a family systems hairball. It is a doubt, fear, worry. There are experts in whatever the hairball is.
Yeah.
Like there are therapists who you can go to them and you can drag your giant extended family whatever and or your thoughts about your own body image or whatever, and there are experts who can like say to you, oh yeah, there's 3 ways to think about this, there are 2 steps you can take.
Yeah.
Like this is all now the tribe possesses everything you need to make little clicks forward. We actually have this. It's so unbelievably exciting.
It is. It is. We
Okay,
live in an amazing moment. Yeah.
okay, I have to ask you because I couldn't love page 186 more.
Okay, so remind me what's there.
Oh no, I'm just gonna tell you page 186. then, and then you tell me what's on page 186.
You've read this book more recently than I have.
Apparently I have, people. We're learning this now. I love the Mary Madison story.
Oh, really? Nobody's asked me about
And I
that.
love it.
Thank you.
It's one of the highlights of the book to me. Because everybody has these. Everybody has these. All the smart people have these. And they just keep them like it's in a closet somewhere. But everybody has these. And I love the fact that you're Krista Tippett and you told this story in the book. You're in the
Yeah.
west of Ireland?
Ireland, yes.
And you hear about this woman
Yeah.
and that people made pilgrimages to meet this woman.
Who reads stones.
And she
And
reads stones.
And can I just say, yes, I'm Krista Tippett, but I'm, this is kind of the way when I started hearing about this is kind of on the woo-woo end of things, and I'm really not woo-woo.
That's
and
exactly
I know
why I
that's a
bring it up.
technical term, and you know what I'm talking about.
I completely know what you're talking about, and that's why the fact that you put it in the book is like so fantastic.
Well, it was life-changing, and I resisted, and then all these people came back, and they were talking about it at breakfast at this writer's retreat, that this woman had seen inside their souls, and she told them things about their lives and their children and people who died who they loved. And
Now where are you bring a stone?
no,
There are stones
you
there?
you walk in, all she knows is your first name. She knows nothing about you.
And is it a hut
like
built
a
into the side of a
wizard.
moss on the
No,
roof? That's what I
no,
picture.
it's a beautiful, lovely, kind of small, light-filled house, and you can see the ocean.
And how old is she?
Oh my gosh. I mean, she's very beautiful. 60s, 70s. I mean, she's one of these people who looks old and young at the same time.
She has no age.
She has no age. Yeah. And so she basically presents this bowl full of stones of every color, and she asks you to put your feet in the stones, right? So,
Are you
far
rolling your
this
eyes?
is going. Yeah, so far this is going exactly the way I thought
What
it would
kind of
go.
nut job?
And then she also brings out this, what is it? She brings out like a board, and she says, just choose the first 12 stones that draw you. So you're thinking, now here's the thing. I think if this woman, right, she has a gift. And if she were
Absolutely.
reading tea leaves, if she were a doctor, she'd be the doctor, or the nurse who brings people back to life. If she had
Absolutely.
a gift.
Or she'd place her hand on your elbow and be like, "Do
Exactly.
you have issues with milk when you were 17?
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Does your skin break out on Thursdays?"
Yeah.
Oh my word, how did you know?
No, so she starts describing my children to me, and then she starts kind of seeing people who are gone. And she sees my grandfather. Oh, I was going to tell you one thing. I don't think I wrote this in there about that. Is she said to me, so you're a teacher? And I said, no, I'm not a teacher.
That's actually where I wanted to go with this interview. By the
Yeah,
way,
she said, no, I'm not. I said, no, I'm not a teacher. In fact, at one point when my children were young, my daughter said to me one day, Mom, it's really good that you're not I was trying to help them with their homework, right? It's really good that you're not a teacher because you'd be a terrible teacher. And so I've never thought of myself that way. And I said, no, I'm not a teacher. And then she kept coming back to this in the interview. She said, I really think you're a teacher. Isn't that interesting? And it made me, it made me think about, there is an aspect of teaching to what I
Absolutely.
do. And it's not as standing in the
Absolutely.
classroom telling you things. But she said, she saw my grandfather and she said, he was very stern, wasn't he? Very strict. She said, she said something like, she said he was hard on himself too. And I think she said, I think he knows now that all those rules weren't so necessary. And she said at some point, but she also said, what he did and what you do is not so different, which was an amazing thing. And also that he saw that. She's telling me this from beyond time. At one point she said, he's raising a glass to you. My grandfather drinking champagne. And this was an amazing moment in my life.
Absolutely.
And it sounds crazy to talk about it. I think it was maybe easier to write about it because you can, I can give it some nuance and
Yes.
some sinew
Yeah.
in writing. You tell the story, and it's like it's moments of mystery, of that kind of mystery. The minute you put them into words, they start to lose something.
Yes.
Um, but it was one of those moments where you just think there's a lot more that's wild and woolly that's going on here.
And that's what yeah, the Reed Stones is in quotes. I was like, oh, I know exactly what she's doing here. She's
Yeah.
going to tell us something that really happened. She's actually going to report it
Hmm.
with no hype. She's going to give us the proper disclaimer. But then, like, for a page here, we're going to go someplace that it's not really like a tangent. It's more like, in some ways, to me, it sums up what you're doing. And I actually wanted to end with this with thank you for all the teaching that you do. Because for many people, you are the interviewer pulling it out of others. But I think this book is, it's like it may be the same content, but it's different medium. And this book you're teaching us here. And it's really, really, really helpful for so many of us. So
Well,
thank you.
I can't tell you what it means for you to really be, for you to be reading the words back to me and to be,
Oh,
because
yeah,
a book is like a baby, right? You
absolutely.
you bring it into the world, but then you set it loose in the world, um, and then it has a life of its own. And this book took a lot out of me to write, and
Yeah.
it's a great gift that you're giving me by loving that book.
I sensed it right away when the table of contents, there were the one word
Hmm.
sections, and that always, I was like, oh, this is a simplicity after complexity. Like, to
Yes,
get it down to
yes, yes.
that, she had to push through complexity, which would have been long titles, and just that this had a certain restraint and discipline to it. And then in the book you mentioned it was difficult, and this feels like this took 7 years and energy because of how it's like another level of, like, almost like it takes so much more energy to make it accessible, especially when we're talking about depth. Um,
Yeah, right. Isn't that funny? Yeah,
yeah, that the simplicity after complexity
yeah,
is, it just takes a whole nother level of
yeah.
blood and sweat, and it's just so fantastic. But we have to finish with we have to just end with that Mary Madison story. I don't want to muck it up.
What was that
Think,
thing that she said to my she said that my grandfather said, we can be closed-minded. We can get closed-minded when we should be investigating.
come on, so good.
And whether my grandfather said that to her in some parallel universe or not, that is a deep truth. And it's a good way to describe what
Right.
I've decided to follow and what I find so many people out there are ready to do. We are ready to be
Absolutely.
investigating.
Absolutely. So good.
Thank
So
you.
good. Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Bell interviews Krista Tippett on Being in the Back House. This edition is brought to you by the universe and love.
Thank you.